You guys, welcome to book review 133. Today I am going to be reviewing Getting Stoned with Savages, a trip through the islands of Fiji and Vanuatu by Maarten Troost. The third book that I will have reviewed by Maarten Troost. So in this book, Maarten finds himself back in Washington, D.C., kind of working a international organization. I think it's the UN, maybe. Yeah, he's working for the UN and is essentially losing his mind, being a paper pusher, doesn't really connect, with his self-fulfillment in life. And he starts thinking back to his time in Kiribati, and one day, with the help of his wife, who works, can find work in the South Pacific because she's sort of like a regional coordinator there, decides to quit his job, move with his wife to Vanuatu, and begin writing his first book, as well as the process of understanding this book, if you will. But really, it provides him the material as well as sort of the life experience that he wants. Now, Vanuatu is not all that he thought it was going to be. Kiribati, or Kiribati, I think it's pronounced Kiribati, the islands where his first book took place, The Sex Lives of Cannibals. It was on an atoll, which was so sort of confined that it had its own problems, but you immediately became part of the clan, if you will. Whereas on Vanuatu, he felt he was very much an outsider. Now, part of this is due to the fact that, unlike on Kiribati, there is a large expatriate community in Vanuatu. Specifically, there are a lot of Australians and some New Zealanders that live there. And they really treat the native Vanuatu sort of like second-class citizens. So these people are second-class citizens within their own country. And inevitably, when another white person moves there, the people of Vanuatu inevitably think that this is just going to be another person that is kind of an oppressor, if you will. Now, that being said, that phenomenon is not in all of Vanuatu. It's actually just in, what is it, Afate, and specifically the city. I forget the city's name. Well, it's the capital of Fate, Port Vila. Yeah, obviously, Port Vila is the capital of Fate, and that's where the capital of the whole country is. Uh, okay, I'm kind of going blank here. I'm gonna have to do this. So, in any case, kind of one of the ways that he ingratiates himself into the society of Vanuatu is he becomes a big advocate of kava, of drinking kava. Now, what is kava? It's a narcotic that is very foul tasting. I have never had it myself, but Maarten Troost, as well as others, describing it as sort of like drinking very muddy, kind of bitter water. But the effect is what people drink it for. It's a mild sedative that really kind of makes you feel mildly euphoric, mildly sedative. You tend to kind of slur your speech a little bit, like you would maybe when you're really drunk. But unlike being really drunk, it's not really associated with erratic behavior as well. And they're a lot less, outside the fact that people are just not productive when they drink kava. There's not a lot of social problems that are associated with the drink. Kind of a funny story in the book is the fact that J. Martin Troost had previously drank in cava just sort of on a I'll try it once basis when he was traveling around the South Pacific the first time that he was in the South Pacific. Um, but other islands, the way that they make the cava is much more mild, and so you have to drink a lot more bowls. They serve it in like these little bowls that you kind of drink. Um, you have to drink a lot of bowls of them in order to have the effect. But on Vanuatu, the way in which they do it makes a much stronger kava. But it's one of those kinds of drugs, I guess you'd say, that the effect isn't felt right away. It takes 20 minutes, 30 minutes, something like that to drink. So, or to have the effects take place. So J. Martin Troost, the first time that he has it, way over drinks. They said that he was essentially had, I don't know if you call it a high, but whatever the kava situation was, it was there for, you know, he said like 2 days or whatever, the effect of the drug. Um, so yeah, and that kind of ingratiated him whenever he traveled all around the island. That was something that could be kind of like almost like smokers, commiserating outside a restaurant because they both smoke. You could do that with people all around. Something else that's kind of interesting is sort of the difference between traditional kava ceremonies and I forget what he calls them, but there's a specific type of bar that is more just sort of like for the consumption rather than the ceremonial aspect of it. Um, and so, kind of, that's a mild way that Western influence has affected. This was particularly true in Port Villa, where there was no ceremony outside of the ceremony you would see, say, like just drinking in a bar of like cheers or whatever, that kind of thing. But there would also be like these elaborate outdoor ceremonies where there would be music playing, and it would be late at night, and it would be around a fire, and very much commiserate with your fellow South Pacific Islander, fellow human, etc., etc. Um, let's see. Yeah, he definitely talks about cannibalism in here. Really, the cannibalism thing felt like a little over blown. Um, Something that I was trying to sell a little bit. Maybe that was a critique. Um, so yeah, there definitely was cannibalism in the South Pacific, but I think it was it might have been prevalent, like 200 years ago, um, and something that definitely happened. But I just think that it's almost a fetishization. He's almost fetishizing. Can't even say the words. Um, the fact that the people have this within their history, when truth be told, it's really not something that exists in modern society. He met some old people on this one island. I believe it starts with an M. Uh, Malakula, whose parents or grandparents were like the last ones to consume human flesh. Um, it is, definitely plausible though. One thing about island economies is that there's only a limited number of resources. So when there becomes overpopulation, it's not like you can continually spread out unless what some of them did, which was travel from island to island, but that's like a big thing. The exploration of the peoples of the South Pacific. And I think also this was not in this book, but I think the explorations of the people of the South Pacific actually stopped about 500 years ago. So there's not really like a lot of options that you really have. So inevitably, when you're hungry and you're running out, somebody from a neighboring tribe is going to go in the pot. Um, Something else he mentioned, though, is as this kind of became more prevalent, now this is in our history, this is not at current, um, cannibalism would start just for the sake of it, even if there was other food sources around. If you had like an enemy or just someone that you were willing to kill, they would go in the pot and you would eat them. But in I think like the late 1800s, maybe, basically when colonization happened in the South Pacific, for better or for worse, I mean, for better, I guess, in this particular instance, but for worse in a lot of other cultural circumstances, the missionaries kind of came in and destroyed a lot of traditional culture, or at least the traditional culture was altered by this new influence, the missionaries. Something interesting, there was all sorts of missionaries in the South Pacific. There were Mormons who, it must have been very strange to have these people that surely they call them savages nowadays, sometimes in the South Pacific, as sort of like a joke or like a way to brand themselves, kind of as the scary people. But I can guarantee you it wasn't just a brand or kind of a play on, their history of the people, or the way that the Mormons saw the people of the South Pacific. I mean, just knowing Mormonism, they would probably scare the shit out of those Mormons. But in any case, let's see, what else? There was a giant cyclone, which was really interesting. Cyclones being the equivalent of hurricanes. They essentially talked about how, like it destroyed sheds. It destroyed a lot of these lean-tos of the poor people. I mentioned that previously. They lived in Port Villa, the native peoples, whereas a lot of the white people that lived in Port Villa had homes that were much more sturdier built. It should be mentioned that in Vanuatu, even among islands of the South Pacific, it's one of the poorer areas. And yeah, Kiribati is quite poor too, but I just mentioned that because there is wealth in terms of sort of like these retirement people or these people that live in compounds. The author, J. Martine Troost, also said that almost because of looting, almost all of the Western sort of houses, the standard Western houses, have large walls, 7, 8, 9 foot walls around them with barbed wire around the top. Most have one or more guard dogs, like either pit bulls or Rottweilers, those kinds of things, on their property. And they also have security systems. So there's definitely the paranoid factor of what the evil brown people are going to do to your society, even though J. Martine Troost went out all over the islands and had relatively little problems with these people. I think the biggest problem J. Martine Troost ran into is that not like someone was trying to steal or anything, but he went to some traditional ceremony and did some faux pas that the chieftain like looked at him real, like, what are you doing? And he had to kind of just walk away from the circumstance and then come back and apologize to the tribe a little bit later for what he did. Let's see. He talked about how in Vanuatu, how corrupt it is, how it's one of the most corrupt societies in the world, and how the president, I think it was the president, prime minister, who he eventually meets, essentially had this giant Ponzi scheme to take government money into his own hands. I really think that, you start talking about some of these South Pacific islands, they really run more like kind of backward Alabama, or I don't know, but Alabama's a bad example, but backward kind of corrupt towns in the United States rather than large efficient governments. You have to remember most of these places have really relatively small numbers of people. I think Vanuatu has maybe like 200,000 people in the whole country. So unless it comes from like outside sources like watchdog groups or whatever, there just isn't the sort of checks and balances in place in a lot of these places to prevent corruption. The last place that J. Martin Troost and his wife visit in. Oh, I should talk a little bit about the cargo cults because I think he went to a spirit, or he went to the. Where was that cargo cult at? I'm not sure which island it is, but something, just a little side note that's interesting about Vanuatu is that there was, in the 1930s, there was a white missionary who was kind of like crazy. And maybe it was like nominally Christian, but like didn't really follow any orthodox beliefs of any of the major branches. But essentially came and talked about how the white people would come with goods and being a prophet and being very lucky, his prophecy came true in the fact that this was the 1930s. World War II then broke out, and the United States used Vanuatu as a major, and specifically this island, I forget what island it is, as a major staging post for operations in the Pacific. I'm trying to think. Yeah, so they use it for major operations within the Pacific, which means huge amounts of cargo, huge amounts of things that, foodstuffs, of sort of clapboard housing, like temporary housing, but which was probably better than the housing like these shacks or traditional, palm frond huts that these people were living in. And so on this one island, the religion took off, and essentially what the religion is the U.S. Navy. And they even use as sort of their wholly iconic symbol the Navy insignia for the United States of America. And so they essentially worship the U.S. Navy, and they do these ceremonies to try to bring them back. Of course, the U.S. Navy has not come back because of, the fact that there is a war. There's a very specific reason why this happened. But these people still worship the U.S. Navy as if it would. Now, there's kind of been another decline in that in modern society, there's more information out there. And so these people still kind of believe it, but they know sort of the circumstances have kind of changed. There's one group that's splitting, and while still a cargo cult, is kind of ingratiating, putting in more, integrating, that's the one I'm looking for, integrating more Christian beliefs into this cargo cult religion, and so it's kind of like a fusion religion. But it's all very interesting. Okay, so the island of Tano is the last place that he goes. He sees an active volcano, which, although sounding interesting, he said was horrifying because this was not a drip volcano like in Hawaii, where the lava just kind of like drips out. And it's still dangerous, but he said that this was a spit and fire volcano, in that people occasionally got killed on this volcano because of molten rock that would like fire out of the volcano. On the rim of the volcano, they went to the highest spot on the rim so that it was furthest from the cauldron, so it would take the most time and would be least likely to hit them. Their guides were super scared, I guess you'd say. They being kind of young, even though it's profitable to take tourists up to this place. A lot of the lower members of the island, the poor members, are the ones that really do these tours just because they're so afraid. Not only is it dangerous, actually it's taboo, which is like, in traditional belief, not allowed. So that was all very scary. Now, what he said was interesting on Tano was the Neko Wairi ceremony, which is essentially, what time am I looking at? 16 minutes. Wow, I gotta get going. which is kind of a marriage ceremony, a ceremony between tribes that is essentially 3 days nonstop of dancing. Um, and it's almost sort of like both a celebration but also a test of endurance that like they have to keep dancing, and there's these elaborate kind of set dances that have to go on for like hours that people participate in, and if they break it's considered taboo. um, and I think that there's like an orgy at one point, which is really weird. J. Martin Troost is not there for that. I think he got abandoned. Like he just was not able to make that part of it. Not to participate, but just to kind of see the cultural thing. But it's not so much as an orgy constantly. It's more as kind of like for young people a sexual exploitation in order to, oh man, this is dicey material, in order to kind of find what you like sexually in terms of a partner, and then eventually partner up and move into a more, I guess you'd say, monogamous relationship after the ceremonies end. Let's see. Travels to the island of Tana. Yeah, and so what happens after this? The tenets of custom. Yeah. So what happens after this is his wife gets pregnant. Speaking of sexual stuff, I guess. And Vanuatu is not really has enough infrastructure to really deal with, like births and all the medical requirements of going through a pregnancy. So rather than move directly back to the United States, they moved to Fiji. And the Fiji part was pretty interesting. Trying to think. He talks about how horrified he is of flying. So that was kind of a constant theme throughout the book, but kind of when he flew from Vanuatu to Fiji. He talked about kind of how rundown Suva is. No, it wasn't Suva. Well, Suva is kind of run down, but it was that other place. Essentially where the big international airport is. Kind of something interesting about Fiji is it has 800,000 people. So you can really call it a small country rather than just kind of like a community that is named a country. But like most tourist areas, there's the really nice tourist resorts. There's sort of the cheaper budget options. But then there's also the sleaze factor. And he said that when he was kind of in the armpit of Fiji was when he was in this one town where the airport is. I can't remember what the name of it is. But there, all it was essentially like girly bars and prostitution. And he said that there were numerous transvestite prostitutes, which he thought was kind of funny. Obviously did not participate in any of it, but the hilarity of him, because I forget, I think he just wanted to go out to have a drink or something and kind of got lost and then was walking around this place for a good chunk of time. But kind of the hilarity that ensues when it's a town, that part of town is basically dedicated to the lesser arts, I guess you'd say. But then he has to tell them no, and kind of these overly catty, feminine transvestites saying, "No, I don't want you," but they're saying, "Please, please, please come have sex with us, cheap, super cheap," and he's like, "No." So it was pretty funny. Let's see. He does talk. I looked at my notes here. It says, talking about Fiji history and culture immediately after talking about, the prostitutes and stuff. Talks about the rugby team. Yeah. So rugby's like the national sport of Fiji. They are not as good as New Zealand, but everyone's obsessed. It's sort of like American football. Everyone gets around for the big game. That's a way that he knew a lot of his neighbors. It transcends boundary lines. economic lines from like the rich to the poor. So yeah, that's really interesting. Uh, yeah, and oh man, he talked a ton about this. How am I forgetting this? He talked a lot about the coup that went on in Fiji during this time period, and how Fiji was essentially split between Indo-Fijians, or people from the subcontinent of India, who 100 to 150 years ago had been brought over as indentured servants to work the sugarcane plantations, but now made up almost 50% of the population, versus the native Fijians who they really never interacted, and there was a lot of economic strife between the two. And one of the reasons that J. Martin Troost went to Vanuatu is he was initially going to go to Fiji, but there was a coup in Fiji, and so he went to Vanuatu instead. And then the coup kind of cleared up around the same time of his wife's pregnancy, so they then moved back to Fiji. What else? Oh, kind of along those same lines, I'm sure it's not 100% true across the board, but is generally true, is that a lot of the economic production of Fiji comes from the Indo-Fijians, either through small shops or, industry, or, just all sorts of stuff along those lines. Whereas Fijians, they work, but for a large number of Fijians, the way that they make their money is that they're the traditional landowners. So whether it's selling or renting, never selling, because it's actually illegal, except in like about 5 to 10% of the country, to sell land to anybody but native Fijians. So what the Fijians do, the native Fijians, is they make huge amounts of money in land leases and rents to both Indo-Fijians who run the shops, etc., 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 as well as Western influence, primarily in like tourism industries. Yeah, that's cleared up. That cleared up a little bit, but it was sort of an armed coup. I can't remember. I think they said maybe there were a couple people in the book that were killed, but for the most part, it was a bloodless coup. It's not like there was really a civil war, but a democratically elected government was overthrown, more or less by like a police action, where they essentially, kicked him out of the Parliament House and established somebody new. Let's see, what else? He goes to some of the beach resorts in Fiji. I forget if it's the Bikini Resort or what it is. In the, let's see, where's that? Yeah, I don't really see where that is, but oh man, I can't remember what the two island chains are, but they're off the west coast of Vanuatu, Viti Levu. Ah, dang it. And they're much smaller islands, some of them being just a couple hundred meters in diameter. And this is really sort of on all budget scales, the vacation spot of Fiji. There's, like the backpackers, which I really like. But he also says, I'm getting old, so I feel this. Everyone there is like in their lower 20s, and even a few in their late teens, that are essentially traveling around the world and talking about the price of, pad thai and, cheap airplane flights and all that stuff. He goes to another resort and it's everyone's like 50 plus, and they're talking about the price of flooring in their home per square foot and what that will result in the net price of their home, which is, is what it is. It's old people. But he eventually is able to kind of travel around and find some of his spots. I think he is kind of disappointed in that aspect, in that there's whether it be the young people or the old people, there's a lot of navel gazing, and there isn't really a lot of integration into to try to find out what Fiji culture is all about. Lastly, he travels to Savu, and that's on Vanuatu. I believe it's Viti Lavu is the main island. But anyway, I think this is called the Garden Island, and he talks about it's very lush. Maybe the beaches aren't the best, but it's very pastoral in kind of a tropical sense. But he says even here, in what a lot of Westerners would consider like paradise, if you will, an unspoiled paradise that isn't crawling with resorts like Vitilavu or some of those other islands are. This is largely undeveloped, but still lush and very great, I guess. But he talks to some of the people on the island. They say there's no jobs, there's no excitement, there's nothing to do. Everybody wants to move out. There's ethnic tension between the Indo-Fijians and the native Fijians. And kind of, it shows the irony of what we think of paradise is really what you make it, rather than just some individual place, I guess. The last chapter, he departs through the United States. Yeah, and so I think that he eventually just kind of got tired of kind of some of the ridiculousness of the South Pacific. It's very lush, it's very much paradise, it's very nice. But there's sort of, some political tensions, or just kind of the way money is derived that he's not real happy about, kind of between native peoples and white peoples, or even different groups of native peoples. Okay, so anyway, I've gone on really long, but this is a good book. Getting Stoned with Savages, A Trip Through the Islands of Fiji and Vanuatu by J. Maarten Troost. All right, check it out, you guys. I think I gave every single thing away in this book because this is a long review, but check it out. All right, bye.